All right, ladies and gents, thanks for jumping in with us. Got Coach Will Voigt here, current coach of the Angola national team. Coach also is a professional coach in Germany, and he's got, to me, one of the most impressive, meaty resumes of our panelists. So, Will, I really appreciate you taking the time to share with us today. These are crazy circumstances that these global coaches and players are trying to navigate, and this is about as good of a way as we can share in the game and kind of continue to grow and challenge ourselves and just avoid stagnation, I guess. So from one guy that spent a lot of time in San Antonio to another guy that's spent a considerable amount of time in San Antonio, I just wanted to say thank you for being here. And I also want to remind our participants out there, everybody that's jumping in right now to the room, Coach is more than happy to answer questions and to address points. So please utilize the Q&A function. That's what I'm here for, and I'll take those right to Coach when they pop up. So don't be afraid to to get involved and engage. I think Coach would like to see some back and forth exchanges here. So Coach Voigt, I'm going to hand it to you, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Chris. Just to reiterate what you said, for sure, people that have questions, I want you to jump in. So, don't let me get too far removed from whatever the subject is at that point. But anyway, I just want to, kind of dive into this. So, the peel switch for us was really a product of our players. So we had a particular player with us on the Angola national team, really good shooter, kind of in the tail end of his career. And players around him knew that he was going to have a hard time in certain one-on-one matchups. And so what they started to do on their own was to, essentially communicate to him which way to get beat. And then they would just switch it once he got beat off the dribble. So seeing that kind of, made at least me start to think about, how could we implement that? And so from there, it's been sort of this defensive philosophy that has grown out of that. So that's just a little bit of background, but I've done a couple of these now and watched a couple of these now, and I like to keep it old school. So to me, it gets a little jumpy when you screen share and do video. So I'm just going to do everything up on the old school board. And, Chris, you jump in if for some reason on your end, I'm not holding it up high enough or whatever the case may be. But
yeah, I got you.
Just want to talk a little bit about what a peel switch is. So, for everybody that's on it, that might not be a clear-cut thing. So I'm just going to, for right now, I'm going to draw up a traditional shell. And this is a big part of how we teach it. So for us, we're going to use 5-man shell. There's a time and place for 4-man, but I think Chris Oliver is one of the speakers. He for sure will talk about 4-man versus 5-man drills. But, it's hard to simulate basketball actions with the 4 in terms of rotation, because just about every defensive system you have relies on a big man to protect the rim. So if you remove that, I think it really changes the teaching. So down the road, there's a place for 4-man. When you've gotten good on your 5-man concepts now, because you're forcing your perimeter guys to cover more ground, I think it's a way, to challenge them later in the season. But I would never think that it's the opposite, where you're building it up to 5. To me, it would go the other direction. But so with that in mind, I'm just going to put a 5-man shell offensively. And so let's say we've got the ball here. So for us, we're just keeping it real simple in the beginning. We're going to keep our post player opposite the ball the whole time. All right. So when you put the defenders around that, I'm just going to show, what a basic peel would look like. All right. So if he's beaten here, a normal rotation is for the big to come across the stop ball, right? For the guard to come inside the big, and for him to drop. So whatever your terms may be, Chris, you're San Antonio guy. So V-back was the Spurs term. Sink is a term we've used in the past. Drop, whatever your word is. But that's sort of standard defense, a standard rotation. So for us, what we've changed about this is that essentially what you're doing is you're trapping the ball on drives. So you're committing two in a traditional defense because this guy would stay on the hip of the ball into two here. Like I said, a lot of this is a product of one player getting our brains thinking a little bit. But I think also in today's game, what you're seeing now is teams, at almost every level are spreading you out, trying to run an action that's going to get you moving at least a little bit, and then they're going to keep the ball moving until they find the shot they want. So for me, it changes your defensive philosophy. So I think in the beginning when these rotations were prevalent, it was really about stopping like a primary scorer. And then what you saw from that is the development of the Steve Nashes, and I can rattle off a lot of international guys too. I'm not I guess it is an international coaches summit. So you look at today's game and Campazzo and some of these guys, the passes that they can make, Teodosic, they started changing it. So initially the thought was, how do we stop the ball? And then now these guys got so good at finding these diagonal skips out of that. So they can come into a trap, right? They can find these baselines. They can find these opposites at a pretty high level. So I think defensively we have to adjust to that. And throughout time, that's kind of what basketball and coaching is, right? Offense evolves, defense evolves. Offense evolves, defense evolves. Like the defense is constantly adjusting, I think, to where the offense goes. So the biggest thing about the peel is that for us, we're not going to trap the ball. So we don't want to put our guys into long rotations for the reason I said that, today's players, we feel can make those passes at a pretty high level. And now you're into a long closeout game, which can be challenging. So what we're doing is as soon as this guy is beaten, we're peeling off of that. And all these rotations that you're naturally doing, now they become switches. So the big will switch onto the ball. All right? That sink or V-back or whatever your term is, that's now his man. All right? This guy now goes here, and then your peel will come to take that one. So all of them were switches. So what I like about that too is that it's an all-out commitment. And I think where that really is important is that drop. So when you come into this area on that big, right, the one that I drew. So when he has to sink inside of that big, if he thinks he also has to come back out to a corner closeout, there's no way he's going to be fully committed to fighting the big. And, I know their coaches, and I was one of them, they would teach top leg techniques or, various techniques to make sure that they didn't get trapped inside where the big could screen them. And now it's difficult to come out. But any way you look at it, you're not fully committed on getting inside the big, fighting that big for rebounding position, making sure you're fully inside to take away lobs, drop-offs from the drive. So, I like the fact that you can fully commit to that part of it. And then the other thing too is that now these guys, right, who've gotten so good at these diagonal skips, right, when you're trapped, we're peeling off into those passing lanes. So,
hey, coach.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm doing what you told me to, though. I'm interrupting.
Yep.
In the term of commitment, there's some chatter here. Can you talk just briefly in the middle of this about a player's psyche? You mentioned like that corner guy is not going to commit to guarding the big if he knows he's about to throw, a low baseline closeout right back into his, into the mix. From your experiences coaching these players, what does that do for players in terms of their effectiveness to allow them to commit to a play? Like what, in your experience, what have you seen? Because that commitment, I think it's a great question. I think that's a big part of this.
Yeah, no, that's a good one. And Chris, you know what? Keep your camera on. I like that I could talk to somebody rather than
okay.
I see the international coach logo.
I got you. Okay.
Talking to a robot. So yeah, no, that's a really good question. So for me, and I've kind of always had this philosophy from a coaching standpoint, and I can remember it as a player. I think a lot of times we make mistakes as coaches where we're asking for everything. So, we want a guy to close out, chop his feet, and properly contest a player. And I just don't think that's realistic. And especially the higher you go up in a level, I just don't think you can do all those things. So, for us, we try to be very specific with what we're asking from our player. And we also want to only ask one thing. So I'll get to how that applies here, but just kind of, continuing with that thought process, because I see it a lot in closeouts or one-on-one defense where, you get mad at a guy because he pulls up and hits a three, but then you also get mad at that same player if he closes out too hard and his guy goes by him off the bounce. So we just try to keep it clean, and we identify in a scouting report, okay, this is a shooter, this is a driver, whatever it may be. And we understand, especially at our level, guys can do more than one thing. But we don't want to ask our players, we don't think it's fair to ask them to take away everything. So we're going to pick the one thing that we can live with and expect our players to then force them to that. So we want to force our opponent to their weaknesses. So in a one-on-one standpoint, I use this closeout example, right? So, if I'm closing out to Steph Curry, then the only thing in my mind is no three. So he could absolutely blow by me one dribble, like I did nothing to slide and keep in front. But in our program, you've done your job. Because again, if you start asking too much of them, then you end up with nothing, right? So to me, it's that exact same concept. So if I'm asking a player, and especially that's going to be a guard 90% of the time. So if I'm asking a guard to get inside of a big and block that big out if this guy were to shoot it, and also make sure that this guy does not drop it off or throw a lob to this guy, and on top of that, make him close back out to the corner when these guys can now throw bullet passes, and for sure that's a guy that can shoot. I just think you're asking too much. And sorry, Chris.
No, one of the questions just popped up in you explaining that a lot of coaches teach, that traditional X out, after a dribble penetration. And this coach is just asking if you could talk about the difference, between this and, just what that traditional X out. I guess the question is more centered around why wouldn't one be more effective than the other?
Sure. So in either way you look at it, right? So, he's talking about an X out. So X out, he takes corner, you're still putting him into a long closeout to the perimeter. So what I'm saying is that if I'm this guy, and I know that one way or the other, whether you're Xing that out or you're making me come to the corner, I'm going to have to come from all the way in here, fighting a big, to all the way out here in a closeout where potentially you're also expecting me to chop my feet and have a proper contest. I'm not going to be fully committed to that, because the more committed I get to fighting this big, the more difficult it's going to be to closing out to these guys. And in my mentality, all players are going to have this. That's my guy. So I'm helping you here, but this or this was my guy. And because I'm doing this, I'm going to look bad. And that's the kind of mentality we're trying to break. So what we're saying is, once you've committed to moving, then it's a full commitment. So, and it goes for all of them. So,
Coach, I think that answers this other question. Is somebody's asking exactly that. They're saying, like, if you're the slot defender, and as that drive is happening, you're teaching those guys, that slot defender, you're teaching him to commit to that corner, not to play two. Is that accurate?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. No, everybody has a specific assignment, and that's what I like about it. So, to that question, right? Yeah. So now the slot guy doesn't have to play two. You're not waiting to see if it's going to be an X out. You're not making your, V back or sync or whatever I'm going to just say V back from now on so we know what we're talking about. But you're not going to make your V back guy then go back to, out to the perimeter. So everybody has one job, and they can fully commit to that one job. So, to me, I like that part of it. And again, I think it's a result of where the game is now. So 20 years ago, those guards were not nearly as good at making those passes. What they were good at was finishing, so the main concern was, you get a guy going downhill like that, that's big time trouble. And so we want to be, all in on that. And then,
right.
And now the evolution of the game and analytics telling us the importance of the three, the development of shooting as a result, and now the development of those players. I think in today's game, that diagonal skip and that corner pass are pretty common plays. They're not spectacular anymore. And, you can see, LeBron James can do it with his weak hand off of one dribble to the NBA line like it's nothing. So it's just, again, I think we have to evolve defensively to match where the offense is. So that's go ahead, Chris.
While you're erasing, one of the questions just came in, and this kind of fits in as well, is how concerned are you about any height discrepancy between that? And you mentioned, like, that could be a lob, that could be a situation where I've got to commit and I've got to fight big. Is that an adjustment that you would make if there was an overly, distinct advantage or disadvantage there for you guys? Or, I guess he's asking what would you, when does that come up, if it comes up, and then what are adjustments?
Well, no matter what, there's going to be a height discrepancy no matter what your defense is, right? So that's going to be a big 95% of the time. That's going to be somebody smaller than him 95% of the time. So, defensively. So even if you weren't switching, at some point, concern about drop-off, concern about offensive rebound, you still have that there. So, in fact, because of that is why I don't want those guys thinking they have to get out. Like, I want them thinking, okay, absolutely, I'm all in on getting a block out early, on getting inside. Now, if the question is leading to, well, now what happens when we're getting, into that big versus small matchup after the drive, I'm going to get to that. So I think we have to just talk about the drive system first, and then we can talk about, okay, So now let's say somehow he does get it here, and this guy is saying, well, oh shoot, we just switched a guard onto a big, and that guy's huge and that guy's small. What we're going to do? We have a plan for that, but let's circle back. So if I forget to get there, bring me back.
I'll remind you, Coach. Would this be a good time as you're continuing on to talk about what happens if that slot drive becomes a middle drive? Like if that point guard's able to get in there through the nail, is there a different rotation?
Yeah. So I think for right now, give me like 5-10 minutes straight, because I think it's going to answer some of the questions that are coming through.
Got it.
And then let's go back and see what I have. So
Perfect.
all I did was just one drive, right? So let's say, just so everybody's on the same page, I showed that slot drive. I think we're all clear on that. So if you have this corner drive baseline, so again, traditional rotation, but now he's coming off the ball, right? So whatever your term is, go, or, whatever, we would call that a baseline go, but whatever your words are. All right, he's coming in, he's dropping, he's peeling out to this one. So just so we can see what each of the drives would look like there, okay? So part of this system is to be no middle. So we, and that was an experiment. In the beginning, we weren't sure. But I think over time, I've come to realize that it is easier. So staying with that concept that's a part of the traditional rotation of keeping the ball out of the middle does make the peels easier. Now, I do want to talk about two of the more difficult peels. So let me just stop there. Chris, do a quick scan to see if anyone had questions on just that, just what I drew. So do we all see like that traditional baseline drive rotation, slot drive rotation?
Coach, I think we're good right now. There's some questions, but I think they're
getting ahead.
Yeah. So I think right now this is also helping. I think
Yep.
Understand these different driving lines and angles. So
perfect. All right, so those are kind of like your standard drives. So if you're in a shell drill with traditional defense, that's what you would do, right? You wouldn't let them go middle. You'd make sure it stayed out. You would see that. So now here's the next one. And these are a little more complicated, but they're still a part of what we're doing. Okay, so now on this slot, and I'll be more exaggerating on the no middle part of this. So on this one, we also have a corner switch. And the big stays home. All right. So for us on the corner, that's always an option. Now, it will depend solely on the call of the corner defender. And a lot of things factor into that. Primarily, how good of a shooter is that guy? All right. But the other thing that's important, and you have to forgive me because I'm drawing like through a camera, that arrow, the way I drew it, is going to get you beat. So it's really important that you're coming across more than you're coming up. Okay? Because with the corner switch, the timing and area is very important. If you leave too soon, that guy is not going to get to the corner in time. So for us, you could corner switch when the ball reaches free throw line. And that's a call that would only come from him, and we would call it corner. All right? So now this guy would come here, and obviously these guys, everybody else can stay home on the weak side. Okay? So you have the corner one. That builds into what I was already drawing. I'll stop there. Any questions on corner switch?
looking at these last couple. You got a really active audience, which is good.
Yeah, I like it.
Okay, yeah, we had a question about corner switch, but it was just what you explained. Okay, yeah, I think right now that's probably it on that. There's still some we can circle back to.
Okay, great. All right, so now to yours, Chris. So, okay, we're trying to be no middle, but what happens if we are beat middle? And that's another thing I like about this is, you know, in the past, and I did it too, there was no plan for getting beat middle. You know, your only answer was, oh, we don't get beat middle. Like, don't do it. You know, we had no solution. So, you know, your question about that. So yeah, we have that in play too. Now, I started with the traditional ones, and as a coach, you guys should do the same with your teams, because the corner switch takes a little more practice and a little more comfort level. And then now this middle switch, I think is the next level beyond that. So let's say he's beat middle. So there's your nail help, right? That's your switch right there. And there's your peel to that, okay? So in fact, what we'll do in our shell drill is often we'll start it with that. So we'll do full rotation, and then when it comes back around, we'll have the first drive, instead of being a slot drive, we'll have the first drive be a middle drive, force this switch, and then when he kicks, there's your first slot drive. All right? But so anytime there's this middle drive, the peel is directly with the man. All right? Same thing with the corner. The peel is directly with the man. When you're in your traditional peel, we tell them to just think about a clock. So when you're in traditional peel, right? This is the first one I drew, just to review. So here's your clock, right? He's peeling here, he's peeling here, he's peeling here. So everybody just turn one dial on that clock, all right? With the middle, you're just looking for the man that took yours. So you know, it's not about anybody moving in the same way as the traditionals. Corner being the same thing. So now, okay, that's great if you can plant a guy at the nail. So, you know, you could apply this with even pack line defensive concepts if you wanted. You know, if you want to be a team that brings it middle, just remember, if you're bringing it middle, then every peel is going to be a direct peel with whoever it is that stopped it.
On that, there was one that just popped up about those side actions, corner or, you know, that low 45. If you've got a drive there, you showed how you can corner peel. You also showed how, you know, if you went middle or nail, you could peel. Are those consistently or more likely going to be two-man rotations when the ball's on one side of the floor? Or do you ever see a three-man rotation in those scenarios where you've got not just the peel switch, but then, you know, someone else? I guess it's dependent on the ball position.
No, that's a good question. So corner switch is just direct. And that's what makes corner switches great if you can do them. Now, what makes corner switching dangerous is why for a long time people would never even consider leaving the strong side corner. You know, pop being one of them. So that's a corner three, and that is a direct sightline pass to that corner. So that's going to make a lot of people nervous, and that's why I said you shouldn't. We don't even talk about corner switching until they're good with traditional. And really, the story behind corner switching, in the beginning, I didn't do it. So, you know, I'm a Spur disciple. So, you know, Pop's strong side deny stuff was like deep in my thinking. And we would stay strong side denied. And if it was a slot drive, it was that traditional peel that I first drew up. And then what happened when you've instilled into your players the thought of peeling, right? And if you think about it, it really, to me, the biggest skill set to be a good peel team is two. One, to have a mentality of help, right? So you've got to be good of that. But two is communication. So if you can really talk to each other and you're always looking to help each other and you've instilled that into your defensive culture, then they naturally want to come off the corner. And that's what started happening. So the same way that the peel developed sort of organically from watching our players, corner switching developed that way too. So our guys were coming off the corner, and in the beginning, me being a bad coach would be whistle, stop, we don't come off the corner. And then I started watching it, and I was like, well, it's working. Like they're getting there. And then, honestly, I had a conversation with the NBA head coach about this defense, and he was the one that was like, I think you got something there. And so he encouraged me to explore more, and sure enough, he was right. And so that's where the corner switch, was created. So now to your question, and I give that story because people need to keep in mind, like, this is an evolving defense. Like I said, I learned about corner switching recently. So the middle switching, I've got some thoughts in my head, and I would love for people to take this and run with it and get back to me and tell me what they figured out. But so your question. So I drew it where it was just two people, right? One person at the nail, and he switched or she switched to take it, and then there's your peel. And in that case, nobody else had to move. So let's say that they're on that side. So in that case, that's just two people, right? Now, here's what I'm thinking. And I'm gonna get to what happens the way we do it. But anybody that's familiar with next pick and roll coverage or first line pick and roll coverage knows what I'm about to get to. So in that pick and roll coverage, right, this nail guy is going to take the ball, but they're going to rotate up from corner, and the person on the ball is going to rotate to there, and then he's coming at an angle where they can't just quickly reverse it. So, I'm hoping we have a lot of international coaches on this, so they'll be very familiar with this. American coaches have no idea probably what I'm talking about.
We actually had a couple pop up coach in the box about next pick and roll coverage. So you're
okay.
Broad stroking their questions and comments. Yeah. So
Great. So I have not done this, but this is what's in my head right now. To your point, if that's a really good shooter, can we use next coverage as part of our peel switch with the drive? And I think it's definitely something to explore. But to answer your question, Chris, we are not doing that as of right now. And I'm going to show you what we're doing. So if they have a lights out shooter, and we're not in a position to just be plugged at that nail, all right? So, that's Curry. Ball's here. Now, we don't want to beat middle, all right? But let's say it happens. And there is nobody here to peel with him the way that I had drawn it initially, okay? So for us, who's going to be the next peel guy? It's going to be your big. So it's the exact same rotation that you did up here with your nail defender. It's going to happen much later in the process. So it's going to be a direct. So he's got and you have to drill that, because if you think about it, your traditional peel has them getting off and going out to the perimeter. This peel has them getting into the big quickly. Now, any of you that are using drop coverages probably are teaching something similar to that with your late switches, in your pick and roll coverage. So to me, that probably has to mirror more your pick and roll defense. So if you're a drop team, that's going to make sense to your guys because they're probably already doing that in drop pick and roll. If you're a first line or next pick and roll team, or you want to be, then I would do that. I would make this be the exact same deal as when you're in a next coverage versus pick and roll.
One of the questions you talking about drilling that, one of the questions that just popped up a couple minutes ago was, when you drill this, do you talk to these guys specifically about, body mechanics, movement, like as a peel guy, and I'm rotating from the ball to that next player. Are there little body positioning nuggets that you guys talk about, like get through quick, or is there certain footwork?
Yeah. So let's go to the traditional peel. Go back to the traditional peel. So I'm just going to talk about the two people involved. All right. So the biggest issues you're going to have are when the player on the ball doesn't want to leave it. So the further down that defender goes with the ball, the longer the closeout that they've created for themselves. And that's why you have to drill this, because it's a fine line, right? So you don't want to just get blown by on the perimeter, but in some ways getting blown by on the perimeter becomes easier because it's so obvious to everyone that, oh, we're in a peel right now. So where it gets a little trickier is you can't tell, you're not sure whether or not that player's beaten, or that player thinks, no, I got this, I don't need it. And so, in those cases, and that's why you have to drill this, it's really important that the big communicate. And as soon as that switch is called, you've got to get out into the passing lane. All right. So to your point about angles and techniques, the first time that we rolled this defense out, now it was our B team, national team versus Serbia's B team. So I do want to say that. But anybody familiar with Serbian basketball knows, like, these guys are very skilled, very good at making reads, and as a result, do not turn the ball over very often. And, we had kind of been working on it, tinkering on it, and we're like, oh, this is great. We're in an international tournament in China. Seemed like the perfect time to do it. We forced 22 turnovers against Serbia, in an international game. And the reason why is kind of what I was saying before. These guards, so when he drives through here, right, they're all being taught to look here for their releases. So if they get into a crowd, that hook pass out, right? They're drilled, they probably don't even see the guy. They just know there's going to be a guy there, and just fling it. Your peel is going to go right into that passing lane. And that's the one that they think for sure they always have. So, in terms of positioning and technique, you got to get those guys to see that part of it. Because what happens, they stay with the ball too long. Not only are they not in that, but now you've created these long closeouts, which was the whole point of why we want appeals, to avoid long closeouts. So that part of it needs to be drilled. And the other part, to me, and again, this is still my brain tinkering, I think in a lot of ways being just a crazy all-out ball pressure team makes sense with the peel. Because, again, you don't want to be a team that's getting blown by, but a blow by is going to be a much cleaner peel than if he stays, does he have it, does he not have it kind of thing. So if that's going to happen, you might as well be all in and see like how disruptive you can be on the ball. So if I knew that I could pressure the ball no matter what, and I've got somebody behind me, then why not? And, those of you, if there are American coaches on here, that's kind of pack line mentality, right? It's like, get into the ball like crazy because we're going to be in this pack line behind you. And so if you're beaten, we're there. It's the same thing with just very different, rotation out of it. So hopefully that answers that. But Chris, why don't you go through, I'm sure.
Yeah, there's a lot. This is the most active room that I've been on. I've sat in on most of these, so this is good. These guys are really engaged. I think a lot of this coach is really thought provoking too, for a lot of these coaches, me included. This gentleman is asking specifically, and you kind of alluded to it in the beginning, but when you're drilling this in a practice setting, do you have a progressive sequence that you work through? I know we don't have like a million years on here, but is there a favorite? Is a 2-on-2 a good place to start, or do you prefer 3-on-3, or do you keep it into fours? I think he's just asking if he started to drill this with his team.
Yeah.
A good starting point for that.
Well, the first one is 5-man shell and traditional, right? So we're gonna stay with no middle drives. We're not gonna corner switch, and we're just gonna get used to peeling, communicating, peeling, communicating, peeling, communicating, peeling. So once you've done that, play out a 5-man shell. So what we'll do is keep the exact same rules that I talked about, where the big stays opposite the ball. So, we've done it in a controlled setting, and I've drawn those, so I'm not going to do that again. But so now the next step to that would be, we've got them like that, and then I'll put everybody inside, coach here, and you can pass to any of them, and then now they're live. And because you put them into a long closeout, presumably, there's going to be something off the bounce, and we'll limit the offense to only dribble drive. So now we've taken the controlled setting of the shell, and we've put them into a live situation and scoring clock. So big believer on that. So anything we're doing for us drill-wise, we make competitive. And to do that, that's put a clock on it, put a score on it. That's a big Mike Dunlap thing that I took from him. And, players are going to very quickly get competitive with it. So I would go from that 5-man to then now, okay, defense, you can now corner peel. Okay. Once we feel like we're good with corner peels, okay, defense, you can now middle peel. All right. So we're doing 5-man shell a lot, probably daily. Now, again, this whole progression stuff. So I don't want to go crazy with people, but, whole part whole methodology. So if people know what I'm talking about, that's great. If they don't, research it. But this is a teaching method, not just for basketball coaching. So teach the whole, then later come to the part, then later go back to the whole. And I think as a coach, you should look the same way and base it now upon, what your season is, and kind of take your calendar out and get a feel for it. So that's how we would approach it. So whole, and now keep in mind a lot, with the national team stuff, rarely do we get to a part. Our windows are so small with our group that there's no time to get there. Now with Telecom Bond and a longer season, now I can go part and return to the whole. So, for the coaches on here with longer time frames, when we do now go to the part, again, keep in mind, I'm not going there until we've built everything through 5-man. And once we have 5-man, Okay, so here's some things you can consider about. So 4-man, all right? Now, what 4-man is going to do is force corners, right? So we're not, traditional 4-man, which I really don't like, is making this guy come all the way across to stop the ball, which isn't very realistic, doesn't happen very often in the game. But now, if I take out that big, then they have no choice. They have to corner. If I take out that big here and he comes to the middle, they have no choice. All right? So they have to now use your middle switch. So you can see how, like, progressively that can get you better at those two switches. And then I would just go into problem areas into your part teaching. So, okay, from the 4-man, where's the breakdown happening? Is it happening on our corner switching? And if it is, well, there's your 2-man. So now you can play 2-on-2 like that. Or, hey, is the breakdown happening with our middle switching? Now you can play 2-on-2 like that. And that's something, with time, I like to do this one a lot. And you can control the amount of space that you put them in as they get better at it. So in the beginning, shrink the space. As they get better, expand it. Because the other part of this we haven't really talked about, but any good defense, I don't care what your system is, you've got to jump to the ball. So if you don't move as a group of 5 in some capacity, whatever your defensive philosophy is, there's going to be a breakdown. And so a big part of this, I just put the guy at the nail, but we didn't talk about how they get there. So let's say the ball starts here. What we'll do is one pass and then live closeout. All right. And so now, if he didn't jump to that pass and he just rips by, they're learning the hard way because there's no big down here to save them like there is in 5-man shell. But again, we're not going there until we can get that hole really solid. And for national team settings, we rarely move out of the hole teaching at all.
Coach, in teaching this, what have you found to be teams that are most effective against this style? What are they doing to make appeal switching teams' life difficult?
I think the same characteristics that make peel switching difficult make any defense difficult. So the more shooting they can put out there, the quicker they can move the ball, and the more they move off the ball are what make it difficult. So, again, that's the recipe for any good offense. But it's easier to peel against stationary players. So, when these guys start cutting and moving off the ball on that weak side, the peels become a little more complicated because instead of like, hey, I got somebody right there, they're kind of moving around a little bit, right? Now, what I would say, though, is that teams that move a lot probably don't have as much dribble penetration because the lanes can potentially get clogged up a little bit more. And so, that's honestly the interesting thing about the peel to me. I'm an American coach who doesn't coach in America. So, I see offense more like this. So, for all the international coaches who are on here, they know what I'm talking about. Like you see that in the international game much more than you see in the American game, which really makes me feel like, man, if I were back in the G League right now, this defense would be, I feel, pretty effective because there's less cutting, there's less ball movement. Like this is really dialed in on stopping dribble penetration, which I think what most American guards are good at, right? Super athletes that can get in and have great finishing ability, versus international guards who maybe aren't as good finishers but are really good at finding passes out of the crowd. So anyway, hopefully that answers that
No,
question.
yeah, no, that's great, Coach. You touched on this just now, and this is, it is an international clinic. It's in the spirit of engaging, all the continents and all these countries, and I think even today, midway through today, we had over 50 countries represented, in the in the participants and the speakers. So as an American that's done that, and this gets us a little bit off the X's and O's. We still have you've had a ton of questions, so there's going to be a lot of people that want to see if they can get an email from you or something to where they can reach out or connect. But as an American, what if you could just talk briefly about what it is, because this is, if you're talking to somebody too that kind of chose that path. The only reason I'm in America now is I have a 2.5-year-old son, and I needed to be here more than anywhere else. How has coaching abroad changed your perceptions, your views? How has it changed you? And what would you tell your 18-year-old, your 20-year-old self who maybe hadn't thought quite about being the head coach of the Angola national team or coaching professionally in Germany? What value do you see in this opportunity?
Good question, Chris. Yeah, I mean, I never set out to be, an international coach. My first experience with international coaching was just dumb luck. So at the time, I was an assistant coach at Metro State with Mike Dunlap. I get a random phone call from an agent that's last minute looking for a coach in Norway, because the guy he had, like, something happened with his wife, but I mean, they're like up against it. And that agent got my name from my high school coach because they literally were sitting next to each other in a gym in Chicago at the time. So I got the call, and honestly, I wasn't going to do it. And then, Coach Dunlap had coached in Australia professionally prior to being at Metro State, and, obviously has gone on and coached the Bobcats and LMU and all these other places. But, he encouraged me to go out there and take a look. And even then, when I went there, it was like, well, this is a paid vacation. Like, in my mind, I was just like, like, basketball outside of America, what could that be like? And even in just a week there, so I went there for a week, I trained their team. And, a lot of ways, this is probably like this ugly American, persona exemplified. But I was just blown away with, like, the level, the ability, the seriousness behind it. Like, I just thought it was going to be a joke. And then you realize that every country has an NBA, right? Like, we live in this bubble here in the US, but the level of professionalism, the level of dedication, the interest levels, like, those things exist throughout the world. And it took that first experience for me because I didn't play professionally overseas. So I didn't have an exposure to that in any other way. And so, I ended up taking the job, and I spent 3 years coaching there, and then, that got everything moving forward. But I think that part, like, if you haven't had the chance to do that, like, it's going to change you. And obviously it's changed my life completely. So from a willingness to jump on one opportunity has now turned in to seeing the world and seeing places that I for sure would have never been to had it not been for basketball. So, my involvement in Africa, Asia, all these different places basically were just the next dominoes to fall after making that first step. And what I've taken from all of that, and I think what is great now, keep in mind, like, that I'm talking 17 years ago when I did this. So 17 years ago, there are no webinars, and there's, getting a hold of an international game is, really, really difficult. And we didn't have any of the technology that we have today to tap in to basketball globally. But, now that I've been exposed to it, and now everybody on this, webinar has the same ability. What's beautiful about all this too is people see the game differently, and the game has evolved differently in all these different places, and even within Africa. So when we play North African teams, their style of play is completely different than when we play West African teams. And European styles versus Asian styles, American styles, South American styles, they're all different. And because of that, coaches have seen things differently and have shown things differently. And, for me and my growth, and I think any coach would say this, like, all we're really doing is just stealing what other people have done and, applying it to our setting and our own personal beliefs, right? Like, and yeah, okay, peel switching is in some ways original, but I already told you, like, my players created it. Like, I never had the thought of doing it if I'm not in a gym in Angola watching Angolan players naturally do this, probably because they come from a culture in which talking all the time and loudly is the norm. So like little things like that. So that's a long-winded answer to your question, but you can see, like, I get really excited about it. Like the international game and growing the international game and giving back and staying connected for all of us is just an amazing experience and great for basketball as a whole.
Well, Coach, again, I honestly can't thank you enough for participating in this. Basketball Embassy's kind of spearheading the event, and the whole concept behind it when we started it was to try to facilitate and empower ambassadors to the game. And I don't think there'd be anybody out there that would argue you're not an incredible one. For us, you're a great representation of America, as you've seen flying around the world, that we don't always give the best impression, when we're out and about. And so I think having somebody like you that's got a heart to serve and a heart for the game is a pretty incredible representation of us. So this session was awesome. We still had a lot of activity on here. Coach, are you active on any social media? Is there any platform that I could share with some of these coaches if they wanted to ask a question or get in touch with you in email or anything like that you'd be willing to share?
Yeah, let me get my Twitter, because
okay, perfect.
One of my goals is to get better at the video part of Twitter. There's some people doing great things through Twitter with play diagrams and all that stuff. Admittedly, right. I'm not there yet, but this will be motivation to get better. So, and I've had people reach out to me, but it's Coach Will Voigt. I'm gonna spell it out here because people misspell my last name a lot. So at Coach Will Voigt.
Okay.
And yeah, so all the questions I couldn't get to during this, all of you reach out to me through that. I will do my best to get back to you in a timely way. Like everyone else, I've got some homeschooling that keeps my hands pretty full. So if I'm not getting back to you quickly, I'm not ignoring you. I'll do my best to get there. But we're all in this thing together, and I'm always happy to share. And like I said earlier, selfishly, I would love for you guys to take some of these concepts and keep building on them and share them back to me. So I think all this is great. And again, Chris, I thank you for putting it all together.
It's our pleasure, Coach. Thanks again. We're all wishing you the best from down here in San Antonio and then everywhere across the planet. This chat room is full of guys from South Central America, Asian countries, African continent was represented today, a ton of Europeans, and so this is powerful. It's important, and We really, really appreciate it.
Great. Thanks, Chris.
All right. We'll see you. Thanks, guys.